Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Itto Outini.
And I'm Mekiya Outini, and today we've got something special for you. We're going to be reading and discussing 3 of our short stories. We write about Americans, Moroccans, and migrants from all walks of life. Today's stories are all set in Morocco. Enjoy. First-time listeners, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're building a community of writers and artists from all walks of life, and since you're with us on this journey, we'd appreciate if you would like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and spread the word. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, or a guest you want us to bring on, please let us know. And for more free resources, check out the Datekeepers blog at thedatekeepers.com/blog. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Many of you have been reaching out and asking if we can read and talk about our stories. We hope you enjoy both the stories and the discussion. If you have any thoughts about the stories, please leave a comment below. Also, if you want us to cover any topic in the upcoming episodes, please reach out to us through our website, thedatekeepers.com.
The title of this first story is The Rain is Falling on Tangier. Like all of our fiction, it's co-authored, and you can read it in volume 52 of Aura Literary Arts Review. The Rain is Falling on Tangier. A summer rain, a softening rain, an edge-dissolving rain, it gathers in gutters, accelerates through alleys, surges down into the sea. A coming, going, coming rain, it thunders, murmurs, thunders on the stone and stucco of the big house on the hill. It fills Naima, in the kitchen of the big house, with a flush of courage as she nibbles on her cookie, crumbs collecting on the surface of her tea. A coming, going, coming courage, which thunders, murmurs, thunders at the back wall of her breastbone. It fills the emptiness of Hasna, stretched beneath her silken bedclothes in the master bedroom, with a sloshing to and fro, her body adrift on the mattress, his face above hers. It fills Salim, standing woodenly above her, gazing down at the blankness to which he is married, with a torrentiality of echoes, images, desires, fears, his own voice, repeating the pledge to her in sickness and in health, and hers, repeating it to him above the music and the cheers, and Naima's, that still small sweetness rising from the void, fluttering to him like a bird across the vastness of his study and alighting on his heart that afternoon, and the words of her father, that stiff and stilted Arabic of his, a staccato as rough as the mountains, still echoing even after 24 years, explaining that he had no money, that he'd soon have to take his daughter to the souk to find a family who would have her as a maid. Salim and Hasna were newlyweds then, he alert with ambition, she swelling with the cells that would become Jamal. They were on holiday. Everything was but a rosy recollection in the making, even the snow that closed the roads and trapped them there in Timahdit. There were just 5 houses near the mountain road, mud-brick hovels really, and from one of them a wizened Berber man emerged and hastened toward them, gesturing for them to roll down a window. "So cold out here. You freeze. Come inside. Come! My wife. She makes the food." The wife and children spoke no Arabic at all. They sat across from Hasna and Salim, lined up on the divan like dolls, swaying as if in a summer breeze, or maybe it was the firelight that made them seem to sway. Their faces were carousels of sullenness and smiles, sullenness and smiles. On the road back to Tangier the following afternoon, Naima in the back seat squirmed and giggled, rocked and wriggled, kicked her feet and hugged herself with skinny arms. She bleated like a sheep. She whined like an insect. She brayed like a donkey. She imitated the sounds of a tractor. She reigned in her own little world, no fear. Now those memories jostle in Salim's mind with more recent ones, Hasna peering at her laptop, undone by the simplicity of a calendar invitation, Hasna gazing into a bowl of ceviche as if the chunks of meat are stones, Hasna standing by the bedside, naked and confused as he approaches with her dressing gown. She's 45. He's 41. Her mother has disowned her. The dementia is a curse from God. Jamal is in America. Why not? Didn't they spend 2 months in San Francisco, 23 years earlier, so that he could have an American passport? It's just the two of them in the old house on the hill, the last remaining faithful ones, Naima and Salim. There is no cunning in Naima's heart, but the fact remains that she is 32, with no husband or fiancé, not even suitors, no skills or degrees, no work experience whatsoever besides what she's acquired here, and that has not included cooking, for Salim and Hasna never really saw her as a servant, rather as a daughter, and never assigned her any chores apart from caring for Jamal. She barely remembers anything at all about the mud brick hut in which she spent her first 8 years, but the corridors of this house spread like tree roots through her mind, branching, stretching, doubling back indefinitely, still as endless as they seemed to her when she was first released into them, allowed to hurtle like a wild animal through her new domain. Smells and sounds excited her. Everything she thought she knew about the world was blown open by the sea. As if through a hairline fissure, Arabic leaked into her mind. Salim and Hasna never punished her for all the nonsense that she babbled, just went on quietly ignoring her until, eventually, the right words came. Now Hasna's mind is webbed with fissures, through which all the words she ever knew have leaked away. Into the vacancy left by Jamal she has flowed. She is the second child that she never had. Salim still wants her, but he cannot reconcile what he wants with what there is. Naima's proposition is suggestive of those soothingly mechanical properties common to things made up of cogs and gears, an intricate system fitted together so that its components may, to preserve its functioning even after damage, spontaneously rearrange themselves, and yet, beneath that quality, there lies another, a vestige of the alchemical capacity for transmutation from sheep to insect to donkey to tractor that was Naima's bread and butter as a child. Above all, she is anxious to be a solution, to please. She hears the creak of the bedroom door. There, at the end of the hall, she sees him, looking hungry, weary, dazed. With crumbs still clinging to her lips, she rises. Her jalaba is the color of foam on the sea. For the duration, tossed and tumbled on the swells, it's not so much the present that she's tasting, but the future, with its promise of a familiar life remade anew. The most important difference will be that Jamal is gone. But when the morning comes, when the watery sun creeps through the rain-streaked glass and finds Naima in her own bed, not in Hasna's, she discovers that Jamal is not the only one who's gone. Moving numbly, nakedly through the empty rooms, she discovers that she has no history of employment, for who now will recommend her? She rediscovers, that she is a spinster, uneducated, unskilled, left alone with the only task of which she is capable, the care of the demented woman in the old house on the hill. She discovers that she's nothing but a dirty Berber from the mountains, what she's been from the beginning, what she will be till the end, that for all her transmutations, she hasn't managed to make herself into a human being. And she discovers, finally, seated once more at the table, gazing stupidly down into a cup of day-old tea, a concavity silky with cookie crumb sediments, that she could have been a daughter, that she almost was.
We can start with the title. The rain is falling on Tangier. The meaning of rain is different in different cultures and languages. In some cultures, rain is a symbol of washing away the past. Naima's past is no longer an option, even if she wants to go back. She does not know how to reconnect with her siblings or her parents if they are still alive.
And she doesn't really have other options either because she's not educated. Her only connections in the city are with Hasna and Salim. She is cut off from the past, but she's also cut off from the future.
For those of you who don't know, I am originally from Morocco. I met many women whose lives are like Naima's. Some ended up actually going to different jobs, whether coffee shops or restaurants, after being a maid for rich people for a long time. So we don't know, even though at the end of the story we know she is still with Hasna, taking care of her, but that doesn't mean that she will stay there forever.
Yeah, it's not even clear she's going to be able to. I mean, if there's not income anymore from Hasna and Salim, it really leaves her in the lurch. I mean, do you think she would have been better off if she had remained connected with her birth family?
Also, what would you do if you were her? And what would you do if you were Salim? Because they seem to be the two people capable of choosing, because Hasna is no longer able to function.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear what people would do if they found themselves in Naima's position too, and also in Salim's. So this next story is a bit of a change of pace, although it deals with some similar themes. It was published in the 11th online issue of a magazine called Gargoyle, which Richard Peabody has run for many, many years, and this story is called The New Sufyan. When the money from the sale of the orchard ran out, and the private hospital announced that they were going to pull the plug on Sufyan, Jalali paid a visit to the public hospital in hopes of sending his grandson there instead. "I'm sorry," he was told. "That's impossible. We need the space for people we can save." "What do you mean?" asked Jalali. "Your grandson was born with holes in his heart," said the nurse. "You can't live without a working cardiovascular system." In a daze, Jalali left the office and wandered through the halls of the hospital in search of an exit. He'd only just found his way out to the parking lot when the nurse caught up with him. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't realize I was breaking the news. I called your hospital, and that's what they told me. Did they not tell you anything?" "They took my money," said Jalali. "I thought they were going to save him. Now I've lost everything. I don't understand. How could this happen? Why?" "Your son and his wife are cousins, right?" said the nurse. "These things happen when cousins get married." "But my parents are cousins," said Jalali, "and I turned out perfectly fine. And I married my cousin. There's nothing wrong with my children." A look of discomfort passed over the nurse's face. "I see," she said. "All I can say is that your son shouldn't have any more children." When Jalali got home, he found his daughter-in-law, Ataka, kneading dough in the kitchen. "But why do they have to take him out of the vitrine?" she wanted to know when he broke the news. The vitrine was what she called the life support machine. "He has holes in his heart," said Jalali. "It's because of your cousin." "Which cousin?" "My son." "Which one of your sons?" Ataka wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, though she was the sharpest of Jalali's brother's children. "Your husband," said Jalali. "Anwar. Listen to me, Ataka. You mustn't let him do it to you anymore." "But then how are we going to make a new Sufyan?" "You leave that to me," said Jalali. "For now, your job is to not get pregnant." That night, Jalali lay awake in bed, tossing and turning. If someone had told him the day before that he would soon find himself plotting to help his daughter-in-law cheat on his son, he would have murdered that someone to defend his family's honor. But Ataka, he reminded himself, was his niece as well as his daughter-in-law. It would be to everyone's advantage if she produced a second Sufyan, even Anwar's. He was the best son anyone could have, faithful and hardworking, but sometimes he did have difficulty understanding things. He'd been told many times, for example, that grown men didn't need to tie off their pant legs with elastic bands whenever they left the house, but still he insisted on doing so. "Just in case I have to go," he'd explained, "so that it won't come gushing out." In the next room, Ataka and Anwar were spending a sleepless night as well. "Come on," whispered Anwar. "Why won't you let me put it in?" "Because you mustn't anymore." "Why not?" "Because it's naked," said Ataka. "You're not supposed to put it in me when it's naked." "But you've never been embarrassed before." "I just wasn't paying attention," said Ataka. "Listen, if you want to keep putting it in me, fine, but not as long as it's naked. You have to make it wear a plastic bag." "A what?" "A plastic bag. Go and ask your friends. They'll tell you how to get one." The next day, Anwar tied off his pant legs as usual and left the house with the packets of chewing gum he was trying to sell in hopes of covering some of the hospital bills. For hours, he wandered the dusty streets, shouting, "Chewing gum! Come get your chewing gum!" But no one was buying. When he ran into one of his friends, he remembered what his wife had said the night before. It took him a while to make his friend understand, but when he did, his eyes lit up, and he promised to get Anwar one of those bags. True to his word, the following afternoon, he brought Anwar not one condom, but an entire box of them. "I'm sure they'll be just the right size," he said, smirking. That night, in the bedroom, Anwar stood before Ataka and made a show of removing the condom from its wrapper and putting it on. He thought it felt a bit tight, but then he remembered that his feet always felt the same way when he got new shoes. Some things just took getting used to. Ataka nodded her approval, and he assumed his usual position on top of her, but as soon as he attempted to enter her, the condom exploded. "But it's not naked," he protested when Ataka pushed him away. "It's just not wearing a hat, that's all." But Ataka wouldn't let him have what he wanted. The following day, the hospital pulled the plug and called Jalali to collect his grandson's body. When Ataka saw her little Sufyan, whom she'd mothered for only 1 week before he'd been whisked away and put in the vitrine 2 years earlier, lying cold and lifeless on the bed, it finally hit her. He was dead. She fled the house, sobbing. Anwar tried to go after her, but forgot his elastic bands and had to return to fix his pant legs. By the time he was ready to chase her, he had no idea where she'd gone. She didn't return until late evening, and when Anwar tried to talk to her, she let out a wail and assaulted him, slapping and kicking. "This is your fault!" she screamed. She refused to spend one more night with her husband. Without anyone's permission, she took a taxi and went back to her father's town, almost 2 hours away. Reeling from the 1-2 punch of losing his wife and son, Anwar plunged into despair. He couldn't be consoled, not even when Jalali reminded him that he would see Ataka again in a few weeks when she came back to town for her sister's wedding. Ataka's younger sister was marrying Anwar's older brother. By this time, Jalali had come up with a plan. He would use the wedding as an opportunity not to facilitate his son's and niece's reconciliation, that could be taken care of later, but to maneuver Ataka into a liaison. By selecting the man who would father the new Sufyan, Jalali hoped to salvage some small shred of self-respect. This way, he told himself, he would be able to look at his grandson, his grandnephew, rather, and know he'd had a hand in his creation. The day of the wedding came. Lights were strung from wooden posts around Jalali's yard, and chairs were set up, and tents were raised, and guests arrived, and night came on, and dancers whirled, and drummers drummed, and soon unattached men and women started vanishing into the shadows of the orchard, which Jalali no longer owned. The sight of all those young people slipping furtively into the trees, some in pairs, others alone, on the hunt, reminded Jalali of how hard the last 2 years had been, and how many sacrifices he'd made, and how much time he'd spent thinking of others, and how rarely he thought of himself, and how little others appreciated him, and how even his wife hardly looked at him anymore, and how old and dry and shriveled up she was, and how, if anyone deserved a distraction that night, it was him. Ataka's time would come later. He also had needs. Glancing around to make sure that no one was watching, Jalali headed for the trees. He was so focused on the pillars of shadow around him, gauging which ones were fig trees and which ones were women, that he completely forgot about the orchard's irrigation ditch. 1 minute he was creeping along, and the next he was lying crumpled at the bottom of the dry gully, gasping in pain. When he groped for his foot, he found his toes pointing the wrong way. Bile leaked onto his tongue, and he whimpered. "Hello?" said a familiar voice. "Who's there?" When Jalali raised his head, he came face to face with Ataka. Her head was thrown back, upside down, and her body was splayed beneath a large, pale stranger who was gazing in astonishment at Jalali. In the moonlight, Jalali recognized him as one of the foreigners who lived in town and worked the gypsum mine. Those miners must have caught wind of the wedding and stopped in for a bite to eat. This one was having his dessert as well. "Uncle," said Ataka, "what are you doing here?" "What are you doing here?" Jalali demanded. "What do you think?" Ataka shot back. "Making another Sufyan." That was the last thing Jalali remembered before he passed out from the pain. When he came to, he was flat on his back in his own bed. The faces gathered around him, with the exception of Ataka's, were not those of his family. His brothers and nieces and nephews and cousins were all still enjoying the party, but rather those of the miners. They'd carried him back from the orchard, one of them explained in faltering French, and bandaged his ankle as best they could, but he should still go to the hospital. "Don't worry," Ataka chimed in Darija. "We didn't stop. We got the job done." 9 months later, in the public hospital, a handsome, healthy, pale-faced boy was born. The entire nursing staff converged on the natal ward to congratulate Ataka. They'd all heard about the private hospital and wanted to make sure that she received proper care. "You're lucky, you know," said the nurse who'd broken the news to Jalali almost a year before, addressing Ataka and Anwar. "It's not common for cousins to have such a healthy child." "Smart," said Ataka, cradling her swaddled child to her breast. "Not lucky." Anwar, who'd been strutting about like a rooster ever since his wife had returned to him, miraculously pregnant with a second Sufyan, thought she was smiling at him and beamed back at her. But she wasn't smiling at him. She was smiling over his shoulder at her uncle, who stood in the corner of the hospital room leaning on the cane he'd been using ever since the miners had misset his ankle. For 9 months, the pain hadn't left him. Even with an aspirin every night, he couldn't get an hour's sleep. He hated that ditch. He hated the figs for requiring irrigation. He hated the orchard. He hated the man who'd acquired the orchard. He hated the private hospital for taking his money. He hated the public one for not taking his grandson. He hated his daughter-in-law, and he hated the miners, especially the one who'd made a cuckold of his son. The pain wasn't the reason he winced, though. By now, he was used to the pain. Ataka, flushed with joy, mistook his wince for a wink. She winked back at him.
So one question that y'all might have is, did he violate the social norms? I personally think he didn't, because he found himself, not only that he lost everything, he lost his money, the hospital took everything, he lost his grandkid, kind of lost his son. So he wants his niece to bring him what he didn't have. In Morocco, we care a lot about what other people think of us. So what would his neighbors think if his son did not produce another baby?
Well, what would they think if they know that it's actually a miner from Europe who produced that baby?
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't care or they wouldn't know?
They wouldn't know.
Well, if he's lucky,
Because
they won't know.
it's cultural of shame. You have to make sure that people don't know what you do in your private life. Like if they hear it, it would be considered a rumor. And the family would just say, yeah, because they're jealous, because they can't have a baby themselves. Again, Morocco is a Muslim country, so it's forbidden for someone to bring a kid that is not their own by birth. So it's really hard for people to question. And even if they do, the family would just say, well, yeah, because they're jealous, because they hate us, because they can't have it themselves, etc.
We called this story the New Sufyan. It evokes the tradition in, at least in America, maybe this is done all over, or like in any culture where there are pets. But like when your pet dies and the family buys a new pet and tells the kid, oh, it's the same one. And they just name it like, okay, Buddy died, so we have Buddy 2, or just Buddy again. On the surface, it kind of looks like that. But in a way, it's tapping into this deeper fear of death and loss that we all have. And everybody has ways of trying to get away from the knowledge of mortality, whether it's convincing ourselves that we're going to live forever or refusing to think about death or focusing on the afterlife. In this case, this family has pretty limited options when it comes to overcoming mortality, but they're using what they have. Okay, we are on to our last story. This one was published in a Canadian magazine called Dark Winter, and it's titled A Scientific Mind. If anyone in Hattu's village had been familiar with the scientific method, they might have said she had a scientific mind, but none of them had ever heard of science, so they called her mad. It was not uncommon in those years, the twilight years of the 20th century, when the rest of the world was preoccupied with the collapse of Yugoslavia, the scandalous tales leaking out of the White House, and the impending threat of Y2K, for Hattu's neighbors to interrupt their chores and watch her lead their most obstinate donkeys and mules along their single unpaved road, sometimes with heavy logs lashed to their backs, which the men had felled especially for the occasion, and other times laden with great sacks of stones. Perhaps it was a spirited commitment to the truth, as Hattu sometimes let herself believe, that moved the villagers to lend her their animals and help her produce raw materials to run her experiments, but more likely it was something else. Perhaps a distant echo of those million televisions tuning in, those million viewers bearing witness to those other, greater happenings unfolding all around the globe, of which Hattu's neighbors knew nothing. The question that had driven Hattu to science, or madness, was this: what sort of animal, or which combination of animals, might a young man and his bride have used to disappear into the night without a trace, along with 4 divans, 16 pillows, 13 blankets, quilts, and comforters, 6 sheepskin, 3 plastic mats, 8 sacks of wheat, corn, barley, and sugar cones, and 7 boxes of dishes, in just under 6 hours, without waking anyone. Had this happened to anyone else's son, Hattu might not have been driven to science or madness, but it had happened to her own son, her one and only, her flesh and blood, her Ali, who'd married a girl from a distant town where people, a few of them anyway, had heard of science. The bride had made no secret of her disappointment with her husband's village, which she'd called the middle of nowhere, despite the extravagant wedding they'd thrown. For 7 days, she'd put up with the bottle gas lights, the unlockable doors, the livestock in the guest rooms, and the overflow from the latrines, but as soon as the wedding was over and all the guests had collapsed in exhaustion, she and Ali had pulled their vanishing act, leaving everyone baffled. What made the incident even more mysterious was that none of the villagers' animals had gone missing. It must have been a big hawk that carried them off, proposed one of the neighbors, who'd had this happen once or twice to her chickens, but this hypothesis had not impressed Hattu. Have you ever seen a hawk like that? She demanded. Impossible. They must have used something with 4 legs. For a while, urged on by Hattu, the men had asked around while trading in nearby towns, bringing back tales of creatures called camels, which carried haystack-shaped hills on their backs, and creatures called buraks, which could fly around the world in just a few hours, and creatures called tractors, which could plow a whole field in a day and drink bottle gas whenever they were thirsty. Hattu, however, was unable to verify any of these outlandish tales, so she remained unsatisfied. As time went on, the failed experiments, the profusion of apocryphal stories, and the neighbors' mockery began to take their toll. Everyone remembered the days when Hattu had carefully standardized her units of measurement, comparing crates of borrowed dishes to boxes of collected stones, taking one dish out or putting one stone in until identical grunts of exertion were produced each time somebody lifted them. By the turn of the century, however, her methodology was becoming more haphazard. Having exhausted every possible condition involving horses, donkeys, and mules, she began asking to borrow sheep and goats instead. She was refused, of course, but one night, under a full moon, a family awoke to ghastly screams. The man of the house rushed outside to find two of their goats lashed together with rope, their hindquarters pinned to the earth beneath heavy sacks. Their backs had been broken. Itto never confessed, of course, but no one had any doubts as to who was responsible. After that, those who'd once indulged her started giving her a wider berth. Whenever she came knocking, asking to borrow milk or eggs, they would apologize, just having run out of whatever she needed. Meanwhile, the children were warned not to play near her home. Itto grew increasingly aloof, eating less, running fewer experiments, and spending long hours lost in thought in the fields. More than once, she was seen standing near snake dens, peering into the tall grass and making strange shapes with her hands. Some said she'd taken up witchcraft. Others thought she was working up the courage to throw herself onto those venomous serpents and end her life. Still others proposed that she was calculating how many snakes one would need to lash together, and how might one go about doing it, to create a living raft with which to transport a divan. Then came the year when Itto fell extremely ill. No one was surprised. She was an old woman, and she'd stopped taking care of herself long ago. Some brought her food, but most left her alone. Soon the news spread to the neighboring villages, carried by traders, and from there it was passed on from town to town until it reached Hassan. Hassan was Itto's nephew. He hadn't seen her since his cousin's wedding, many years ago, but he thought of her often and was dismayed to hear of her decline. The following day, Hassan met Ali in a coffee shop. "Word on the street is that your mother's dying," he said. "Only God knows how many days she's got left. Now's the time to make things right." "But how can I show my face?" "You've got to." "I can't." Ali shook his head miserably. "I'm too ashamed." "How about I bring her then? Here?" "Why not? The doctors might even be able to help her." "Mimuna will never allow it," said Ali. "How can I bring her and not even let her stay under my roof?" "She's your own mother, Ali. Are you the man of the house or not?" Ali gazed dejectedly into his coffee. "I'll go and get her tomorrow," said Hassan. "You sort things out with Mimuna. Leave the rest to me." The next day, Hassan rose early and drove for 2 hours out of the city and into the mountains. When the road became impassable, he left his pickup and borrowed a donkey. It took another hour and a half to reach the village, by which time the day was very hot and he was sweating. "She's been coughing up blood for some time now," reported the neighbors. "She won't live to see the sunset." "She's got to," said Hassan. "Come on, help me get her on the donkey." "I can't be a sack of grain," Itto protested, pale and delirious as they hoisted her onto the animal's back. "I'm too light. I'm skin and bones." The smell coming off her was too much to bear, and the donkey's swift canter jarred fresh clots of blood from her lungs, but Hassan, breathing through his mouth, forced himself to hold her in his arms. Everybody had abandoned this unfortunate woman, he reminded himself, even her own son. He would not abandon her too. By the time they arrived at the pickup, she was too weak to sit up on her own. Instead of propping her up in the front seat, Hassan helped her into the bed, where there were blankets over corrugated steel. Then he returned the donkey to its owner, got in the truck, and started the engine. For days, the thread connecting Itto's body to her mind had been unspooling, allowing her consciousness to drift ever further from the known world, but the truck's sudden lurch gave that thread an unexpected tug. She felt the crimson wetness on her lips and chin and collarbone. She smelled gas. She felt her head lolling. The truck picked up speed. Through half-closed eyes, she saw branches whipping by, the blue sky a river in flood. "Ah," she breathed, the revelation rattling dryly in her lungs. "So, this is how they did it." Then she died.
Our character, Itto, found herself with nothing but her brain, trying to find out why her only son left with no explanation.
Not just why, but how.
Well,
I mean, she's kind of substituting the question how for the question why, because maybe why would be easier for her to answer, but it's also more painful. So she's focusing on the more difficult question, the question she really doesn't have the resources to answer, and she's dedicating her life to that because maybe she could get the answer to why, and that would hurt her too much. I mean, in one sense, her life was destroyed. She'd poured everything into her son, and now he's gone, but maybe she could have found some other way to make meaning in her life if she hadn't fallen into this obsession. Or, maybe not. This is not clear cut at all. But what if she had approached this problem differently? Instead of seeking a technical solution to this problem, what if she tried to make peace with the fact that her son is gone and thought, okay, what can I do now?
Being stuck in the past is not a good choice for a lot of people. Her son didn't even come later to ask to see how is she doing. He didn't want her. The wife didn't want her. And she was the only one who was stuck. Even her neighbors were like tired of her. This story personally makes me think about those of us who spend a lot of time questioning instead of trying to find solutions. I don't know in her case, she didn't have the tools, but for a lot of people, for example, they say, I am not going to write my book until I am 80 or 90. How do you know that you're going to live that long?
Yeah, while you're stuck in the past, life is still passing you by. Time is still moving forward. You always have a choice that you can make. There's always a choice in front of you. It's never entirely in the past until you're dead. So yeah, are you satisfied with the choices you're making?
Another choice you can make is please subscribe, like, share, comment.
Yes, we would be very excited if you made that choice. We really appreciate you guys. We're tuning out. Have a great day.